Okay. So as we're having people filter in here, we're just going to give it a quick minute just so that we get people to be able to kind of show up and enter the room. Michelle from Mia, just a quick question. We would anticipate to see students enter the Zoom and we would be able to sort of see their tile as participants, or are we not able to do that through?
No, we are in
this?
webinar mode.
Okay, great. I just didn't know if we could see exactly how many people are in the room itself. Gotcha. Okay. Okay, well, having given it a minute, we're going to go ahead and roll into today's presentation. I appreciate everybody showing up for this ongoing Building Smart series sponsored by DTE and Consumers Energy. My name is Chris McTaggart. I am the president of Building Efficiency Resources. We are a national training and quality assurance provider focused on everything from code compliance to passive house and beyond. We work with raters all across the United States that are working with home builders, code officials, architects, engineers on basically how to achieve their goals for building energy efficiency, meeting energy code or program standards such as those that we're going to be talking about today in today's presentation, above code programs. Jumping right into it, we are going to be doing some introductions just to get to know who I am as well as who y'all are, and then kind of talking a little bit about the code today. Where are we? And I'll just say some of you all may have heard some rumblings about possible changes at the state level. We're not going to go into depth in that today because, well, frankly speaking, we had prepared this ahead of time. And we also know that there's always the chance that something could change over the next few months. And so until we have more certainty on exactly what is coming down the pipeline, we're going to focus on today. What is the code in Michigan today? This is not a code training. This is an above code programs training. But in order to kind of get a good baseline of where we're starting from, we got to talk about the energy code today. Jumping into HERS ratings. HERS ratings aren't necessarily a program per se, but they are something that raters and their home builder partners can participate in through DTE and Consumers Energy in order to earn incentives as well as to help build and promote more energy efficient homes. Then rolling into EPA's Energy Star Homes program, DOE Zero Energy Ready Homes, and then Passive House, which is sort of the ultimate rung on the ladder of above code programs. Now, again, you may have heard some rumblings about possible changes afoot at a national stage that may impact some of these programs. Again, the ink isn't dried on the page on any of that. And, right now, DTE and Consumers Energy are sponsoring new home incentive programs that have eligibility criteria for Energy Star, Zero Energy Ready Homes, and Passive House. So we're going to be talking about all of them. And, the information contained in this webinar is meant to empower you all to understand sort of the foundation of what these programs are, how they work, and how you can apply them to your projects going forward. So again, I'm Chris McTaggart, president of Building Efficiency Resources. I have been in the building energy efficiency industry for 16 years and been working primarily in the residential new construction industry, focused on training and education of ResNet home energy raters, rating field inspectors, HERS modelers. So basically, BER, we're kind of like the pros pro. We're kind of the organization that really helps to build up and empower independent HERS raters and HERS rating companies to go out there and really have the knowledge and tools and skills to work with their home builder partners, architects, engineers, homeowners, etc. Again, to achieve whatever goals they have. Some builders are just interested in basic compliance. get me to code compliance and no more. Well, that's fine, but some builders also want to aspire to do more. They want to have their homes energy rated. They want to build a home to Energy Star, or perhaps even beyond that, going to the DOE Zero Energy Ready Homes program, Passive House, or potentially other green building programs like LEED for homes, the National Green Building Standard, etc. So BR, we're a training and education organization. We're also a quality assurance organization. So part of what we do is that we oversee the rating work that's performed by raters associated with our providership, and we help to make sure that basically everybody is doing the work consistently throughout our providership. I also sit on the ResNet board of directors, and so I've been very actively involved in sort of policy making in this arena for a long time. Well, that's great that you know that I've got a good background in all this stuff, but why am I presenting here for DTE and Consumers? Well, it happens to be that I'm a hometown boy. I'm from the state of Michigan, and I live in the state of Michigan. So I know the state very well, all the different corners of the state, whether it's Southeast Michigan, where I reside, over to the West Michigan, where we have raters that participate quite a bit with home builders over in that region, and then up even to the parts of northern Lower Peninsula, Petoskey, Traverse City, Alpena, and then even up into the Upper Peninsula, where obviously there's not as much residential new construction home building, but there certainly is, and energy efficiency is more important than ever. I think we could argue the reason why, well, energy costs are going up, and consumers want to have comfortable homes that have reasonable energy bills. So kind of doesn't really matter where we're starting from, whether or not we're a builder that just is interested in basic compliance, or if we're interested in pushing the envelope into some of these above code programs. We're hoping to make this session relevant to you. So to kind of, now that you know a little bit about me, I'd like to understand who's in the audience here. So we're going to throw up a little bit of a poll just to find out who is in the audience, and we're going to go ahead and do that poll right now to see who we got. So please go ahead and participate, the folks that are here in the audience. I've gotten a good amount of people. All right, so we ended up getting our results here, and we have essentially raters and we have utility representatives. So that's good. I'm excited to inform you all about these programs that maybe you don't know as much about, or you want to be able to learn more about, so you can create that sort of sale for your home builders. Obviously, we would love to see some builders, but they're out there swinging hammers and digging foundations and all that good stuff. So we'll have to just take this information back and end up empowering them that way. So going ahead into the kind of the meat of the presentation, our goal here is for you to really understand where we are today, but then how to really implement some of these above code programs. As it turns out, a lot of these above code programs, they build on the energy code. They build on the basics of where we are already supposed to be today through our energy codes. And so what we're trying to do is trying to empower you all to understand the differences and the nuances of these above code programs, and how you can help to create that sale, to get your builders involved, to get architects and engineers to start building these into their plans, so that we can start to really implement them to improve the building stock here in Michigan, as well as get a decent incentive back to the builder for having participated in them. So, definitely want to make sure that we leave here understanding that there are incentives available for builders who choose to participate in these above code programs. And we want to get more people involved, because it really helps overall get us prepared for whatever might come down in the future, as well as to, again, have homeowners building, basically buying these new homes, have better quality homes starting today. So again, I wanted to talk about the energy code, Michigan. Where are we today, and And like I preferenced in the very beginning, I'm not going to go into great detail about what might be the case in a few months from now with a potential change in the energy code. We don't have enough information yet to be able to really speak at length about that. There's a possibility later on in this series that we may shake up the deck a little bit in order to possibly give you some information if we think that it's going to be relevant. But for right now, we're going to stick with the script and talk about the energy code today, which is the 2015 Michigan Energy Code. So Michigan adopted the 2015 Michigan Energy Code going back to, it was probably 2016 or 17, something in that realm. And it changed from what was the 2010 Michigan Unified Energy Code, which is based off of the 2009 IECC, to a code that was based off of the 2015 IECC. Now, it's important to note that Michigan didn't just adopt the code straight. They adopted it with amendments, which many states oftentimes do. They will adopt a code and then take certain components of it and choose to modify those requirements in order to meet the needs of the building community. So, for example, in Michigan, some of the insulation values changed in terms of prescriptive requirements. And there were actually some pretty substantial changes to the simulated performance R405 compliance methodology. So we'll be talking about that. The 2015 is also notable because this is the first version of an energy code in Michigan that included the ability to demonstrate compliance using an energy rating index, an ERI. So section R406 allows for an ERI to be used for compliance with the Michigan Energy Code. And the ERI is essentially the same as a HERS rating. It is sort of the non-proprietary version of the HERS index. A little bit different, insofar as it was calculated based off of an older compliance standard for the energy rating index, the 301-2014 standard, whereas we're all the way up to the 301-2022 standard. So there's a few things that you might not get credit for that may have changed from version to version, but regardless, it's cool. You can now use an ERI. Now, I mentioned these amendments. It's important to understand that with these amendments, ultimately, Michigan chose to make the code a little bit less stringent through these amendments. And we're going to get into exactly how that shakes out. So from a prescriptive standpoint, so it's important to understand, again, I'm just going to back up one slide. There are 3 compliance methods for the energy code. There's the prescriptive code, which essentially means that you're going to do everything from section 401 to 404 of the code, both the prescriptive items and the mandatory items. Then there's section R405, which is that simulated performance path. It's kind of like a HERS rating, but doesn't necessarily include every variable of consideration. And then you have that R406, which is the ERI, kind of like a HERS rating, basically. So prescriptive, basically everything, again, from 401 to 404 has to be met. The things that are mandatory have to be done exactly that way. And then certain things are maybe a little bit more flexible. So like, the exact R values or U factors can actually be traded off. So we'll get into exactly how that works. If you open up your energy code, section 402 has criteria on the building envelope. So that's not just what insulation values to put in, but also certain specific insulated assembly criteria. So like how to insulate slabs, how to insulate attics and potentially get credit for things like raised heel trusses. If we get into, and then the building envelope also talks about how to air seal a building and test it for air tightness compliance. Things like programmable thermostats and other controls that would fall under section R403, as well as things have to do with duct sealing and duct testing, as well as ventilation. This is the first energy code that Michigan ever adopted that had a mandatory requirement for mechanical ventilation, and you would find it there within section R403. You know, and then finally, there are some information on lighting systems. That's in section R. So the simulated performance path is, again, it's an energy modeled path that is used using energy modeling software. So Ecotrope is arguably the most popular software for performing these types of energy modeling compliance analyses. REM historically has been utilized quite a bit as well. And so the way that the simulated performance path works, it's not quite a HERS rating, but it uses similar software. The big thing is it's a comparison between the reference design and then the proposed design. And they're the exact same, like geometric twin of one another. And so you put in all the information about the home, such as insulation characteristics of all the building assemblies, the square footage of those building assemblies, air tightness, duct configurations, meaning both where are the ducts located, how well insulated they are, how tight are they, how airtight is the house, what kind of mechanical ventilation system, and then the heating, cooling, and water heating systems as well. And what ultimately comes out of this is there is a comparison between the reference design and the proposed design for heating energy use, cooling energy use, and water heating. And then that energy use is converted to a cost value. So ultimately, R405, the simulated performance, requires that buildings cost less to operate than the reference home. So we can see in this table here, we've got the as designed proposed home is going to cost about $1,400 per year for energy versus the reference home, which is $1,600 for heating, cooling, and water heating energy. You'll also note that lights and appliances are listed below. They're not factored into this comparison analysis for compliance. They're just kind of listed there for reference in case somebody wanted to see it. ERI, it's an energy rating index. It's very similar to the ResNet HERS rating. The 2015 IECC was the first time that an ERI was formally recognized within a model code. And basically, in order to get into the model code, it had to become non-brand proprietary. So it couldn't be the ResNet HERS index. It had to become something that was a little bit less specific as to who might implement an ERI. So it turns out that the ERI, you know, you don't have to do a ResNet HERS rating. There's actually other entities out there that may oversee ERI calculations. I will say, in my experience, the ERI is not used very much in Michigan yet at this point because it's not necessarily the path of least resistance for code compliance. To achieve compliance in Michigan, you have to have an ERI of 55 in climate zone 5, 54 in climate zone 6, and then a 53 in climate zone 7. So these are somewhat stringent numbers. They're not necessarily a walk in the park. And so I don't always see people comply with the ERI for code compliance, but you could. So if we kind of compare all of these different paths, so again, the prescriptive is section R401 through 404 versus simulated performance is section R405, and then ERI is 406. So if we were going to go into our code book, that's where we would find the requirements for each of these compliance paths. In terms of what is considered, prescriptive is fairly comprehensive, but it doesn't necessarily get into exhaustive details about sort of, you know, gaining efficiency for things like you have to meet a certain air tightness, but you don't get credit for being more airtight. The ducts have to be a certain level of tightness, but you don't get credit if they're even more tight. Versus if you get into simulated performance, you get credit for some of those things. So you can trade off having a more airtight house or a house with better duct configurations for potentially possibly less insulation in the building. For the ERI, it considers all of those elements, but even more. It includes, you know, provisions for lighting efficiency, for mechanical system and water heating efficiency, which, interestingly enough, R405 does not include. It's a little known fact, but when you do the simulated performance alternative, the reference home and the rated home have the same efficiency values for mechanical systems, basically, unless you're using electric resistance heating in the proposed home. In that case, you're compared against a reference home with a federal minimum heat pump. So you got some work to do if you're doing electric resistance heating. But in all other circumstances, the heating system, the cooling system, and the water heating system efficiency are the same between the reference home and the proposed home. So just keep that in mind. You don't necessarily get that kind of credit for, well, I put in a 95% furnace. Don't I get credit for that? Not in section R405. You actually don't, because the reference home would have the same. When you get into the ERI, that's where you start to get more credit for mechanical system efficiency. Some of the things that is really important to understand is, like, let's go down to new construction performance criteria. Under prescriptives, basically you just have to document compliance using that prescriptive methodology. When you get into R405 and R406, there's a little bit of extra stuff you have to do, but you don't have to meet those prescriptive insulation values. So if you look at R405, the simulated performance, basically you just have to have a solar heat gain coefficient on windows that is less than or equal to the 2009 IECC value. But ultimately there's really not a lot that has to be done other than the annual energy cost having to be less than the simulated performance. Now, I'll say future versions of the energy code, it changes. So just understand this is about the 2015 IECC. So for right now, in a lot of ways, the simulated performance is probably in some ways the path of least resistance here in Michigan. The ERI, you have to have a 2009 IECC level building enclosure as well as a compliant ERI target. All of these paths of compliance would require air tightness testing as well as duct leakage testing. You'll notice that duct leakage has a little asterisk next to it, because if ducts are 100% inside conditioned space, inside the building thermal envelope, then you don't technically have to test the ducts for prescriptive. And you could for simulate performance in ERI in order to gain a little bit of credit, but it's not necessarily obligatory. In terms of what assessment tools could be used, so prescriptive criteria, so like literally building to the code insulation tables, which would be, for the most part, R20 walls, R38 in the ceiling, R10 basement walls, etc. That would be kind of what you would be recommended to do if you just want to do pure prescriptive. You can also do what's called a total UA trade-off, which allows some more flexibility in those insulation criteria. You can use ecotrope and rem rate to do that compliance for prescriptive UA trade-off. Although I would say historically people would use a freeware provided by the Department of Energy called ResCheck. Kind of the rub on that, though, is that because Michigan reduced some of the insulation criteria for its version of the 2015 IECC, if you use ResCheck, you're actually going to have to meet the model 2015 code. So it's sort of the national version of the energy code versus the modified, amended, and somewhat weakened version of the Michigan code. So if you or your builders are looking to do prescriptive compliance, it may be worth it to the builder to pursue using either an ecotrope or rem rate analysis, because it may be more straightforward. Both R405 and R406, you're using energy modeling software. And again, probably ecotrope or rem rate would be the most likely solutions that would be used. Okay, so now that we kind of talked about the energy code, again, we want to talk about it because it's important to understand that there's a minimum expectation for energy efficiency here by law in the state of Michigan. And we can talk about like, what is the code really understood and is it always enforced? To be honest, that's a little bit above our ability to implement here in effect. But the idea is to say we're already supposed to be doing a certain level of energy efficiency by law for every home. What can we do to do a little bit better than that? How do we quantify doing better? Well, the HERS index could be one of those ways. By getting a HERS index performed on a home, that would at least say, how is this performing, versus a cohort of national criteria? And can we potentially get builders some credit for having gone through that process? Energy Star is a federal environmental protection agency based program that helps to promote more energy efficient buildings. Basically 10% better than code is what it strives for, and has a lot of mandatory criteria that's sort of building science best practices that build off of both the HERS index, but is also off of energy code to help to deliver a consistent quality product for consumers. The DOE Zero Energy Ready Homes is sort of the companion program that comes from the Department of Energy, and it builds on Energy Star. It's even more efficient than Energy Star is, and it's compared to an even more modern energy code to derive its savings. And then also has some considerations for the possibility of solar readiness for the future of that home. So a homeowner may be able to possibly offset some of their energy use with on-site renewable power at some point in the future. Finally, we've got Passive House. Passive House, there's actually two different implementers of the Passive House standard in North America. The PHI program is the Passive House International Standard. It is a German-based standard that does have a footprint of compliance here in the United States, but by far FIAS is more probably known and used for Passive House. Originally called the Passive House Institute US, they've sort of transitioned to just being recognized as FIAS. Basically took that German standard and then tried to basically create something that was a little bit more appropriate for the North American climate, more of a climate adjusted version of the same principles that the Passive House program brings to the table. So we'll talk a little bit about that here. So starts with the basics. Once we've talked about code, gotta talk about HERS ratings. That would be your first step if you are a rater working with builders to promote that a builder might consider taking that next step. And again, through DTE and Consumers Energy, there are incentives that basically help to encourage the builder to go ahead and take that next step. So a home energy rating system index, it is a score that is applied to a home that helps to demonstrate the home's energy efficiency compared to a standard reference home. That reference home is basically equal to a 2006 IECC compliant home with federal minimum equipment. So in our example here on the right, the home scores a 65 on the HERS index. That would mean that it is 35% more efficient than that reference home. So basically 35% better than a sort of standard home built to the 2006 IECC. So every point of reduction in energy consumption versus that reference home is 1 point reduction on the HERS index. So again, 100 minus 65 gives us 35% savings, therefore a HERS index of 65. So the process for doing a rating, so here we go. A little bit more about what is a HERS index. So again, 1 point reduction on the HERS index is 1% energy use savings. The HERS 100 is basically meeting the 2006 IECC. We put an asterisk next to the typical existing home of 130. That can really depend on your market. I will say in Michigan, we have a very old building stock. So like I live in Detroit. The average age of homes in Detroit is probably like something from like the 1950s. We just have a lot of turn of the 20th century homes, 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. We have a lot of old homes. So, when I bought my home, it didn't have any insulation. It was super leaky, old single pane windows, old mechanical systems. So honestly, my HERS index was probably closer to like 200 when I bought my house. So that 130, it can vary depending on where you're at. if you're in a community that's, say, like a new construction dominant community over the last 10 years or so, well, the average might be closer to 100 or maybe even a little bit lower than 100. So I always kind of caution people about that, taking that HERS 130 to the bank. It sort of really depends on where you're at. A zero energy ready home would be a home that scores a 0 on the HERS index. So again, if we had a HERS 60, that'd be 40% more efficient than the reference home. We use a standard for calculating the HERS index. Technically, right now, the minimum standard would be 301-2019, although there is a 301-2022 that is out there. And basically, that's the rules for calculating the specifications of the rated home versus the reference home. It includes provisions for heating, energy, cooling, water heating, lighting, and appliances, as well as on-site power production. So those are all the different sort of savings methodologies, and things that go into influencing that for like heating and cooling would be your insulation levels, the amount of windows that you have, the orientation of your windows, the U and SHGC values on windows, how airtight the home is, what your mechanical ventilation is, where your ducts located. Are they insulated ducts? How tight are those ducts? That's all the different things that go into it. It's actually quite complex. There's even a method to evaluate the grading of the installation of heating and cooling equipment, so that if a builder helps to ensure that their contractor is designing and installing a mechanical system properly, then they can get some credit on the HERS index for that as well. Again, the primary software is used in Michigan would probably be Ecotrope and RemRate. There is a third accredited software tool called Energy Gauge. Could be used. It's not generally used in Michigan, but it could. So again, these minimum rated features, all the different things that could go into potentially influencing your HERS index mechanical system value. So you do get credit for that 95% furnace. You do get credit for a 14 SEER or a 15 SEER air conditioner. You do get credit for a high efficiency electric or gas water heater. You do get credit if your ducts are all inside conditioned space and they're tight. There's a lot of different things that ultimately go into this: performance testing, infiltration testing, duct leakage, ventilation. And then, like I mentioned, HVAC grading. All of this goes into helping to influence and lower that HERS index score, in addition to your insulated assemblies. Now, it's important to note that for the HERS index, HERS index does not mandate any minimum level of insulation. You could be building to a code compliance level, perhaps using the performance methodology, that would not meet prescriptive insulation levels, but you may still get a good HERS index score. Why is that? Well, because of all the other stuff that goes into it: the lights and appliances, the performance testing values, and the mechanical equipment. And in a lot of ways, that's why builders like the HERS index, because it's extremely flexible. It gives a lot of flexibility to builders to choose their path to making an energy efficient home. The prescriptive path of code compliance is well intentioned, and I think we could all agree that if you followed it, you'd probably get a pretty good home, but it's not quite as flexible. Not every builder, through their home plan designs, are able to meet some of those values. And then, there's potentially some cost and benefit trade-offs between more insulation versus focusing on other areas like better mechanical systems, more air tightness, etc. So that's why the HERS index exists, is to basically give builders that kind of ultimate path to demonstrating compliance and showing that they've built an energy efficient home, but doing so in a way that really empowers them to choose how to make the home more energy efficient. So the HERS rating process, basically, you do a projected rating, generally speaking. Oftentimes that may be used at the same time for like performance code permitting. And then the home goes through construction. And during construction, there is on-site inspections that are performed, particularly an insulation inspection. Insulation is inspected for not only how much is in there, what the R values are, but also, basically, was it properly installed? And then at final, then there's a final inspection that's performed where all the other details of the home are verified. The mechanical systems that were installed, the lighting systems, the appliances. A blower door test is performed in order to document how airtight the home is. Duct leakage testing for ducts to show that they're tight. Mechanical ventilation testing, maybe HVAC grading, and perhaps even evaluation of on-site power production systems like solar panels, if in fact they're installed. All that gets put into software, and then it's put through ResNet's quality assurance system. So every rater has to work with a provider that oversees the quality assurance of the ratings that are submitted through their providership. And so ratings are subject to both file QA as well as potentially field QA through that system. And ultimately, reports are generated, given to the builders. And if you're participating in the DTE and Consumers program, that rating can then be used for incentives. Well, how popular is the HERS index? It's gaining in popularity. Last year, we had almost 440,000 homes that went through the registry with an average HERS index of 55. So that's pretty interesting because we're nationally really pretty involved. You know, there's lots of ratings being done. Michigan, we're doing okay. We did 5,000 ratings in Michigan last year, which is pretty decent, with an average score of 59. So I would say, you know, there's 50 states. We're lagging a little bit behind. It's not too surprising. Michigan has a solid, but maybe not totally prolific new construction market, not in the same way as you might get from a Texas or a Florida or North Carolina or Colorado or Arizona. Those are kind of big population boom states. Michigan has a fair amount of home building and therefore a fair amount of participation with HERS index ratings. We'd like to have more. We think that every house should be HERS rated because there's a lot of value given to both the builder as well as to the consumer going through that full process. And over time, you know, we may be able to see some innovations like adoption of the HVAC grading that may be able to help lower our HERS index scores as well. So it's interesting. The average score in Michigan was a 59. That's the exact score that's needed for minimum participation compliance in the Consumers Energy program. So that average HERS index would meet both the requirements for Consumers Energy as well as for DTE for participation in the New Homes program. So in other words, you have to have at least a 59 or for consumers and at least a 60 for DTE in order to participate in these HERS index new construction based programs. So that's kind of your benchmark of entry. So if you're a rater working with home builders that are maybe either doing prescriptive or performance code right now, you should probably go ahead and put a couple of their analyses through the HERS index tool and find out where are they scoring. And let's just imagine that they're scoring a 65. What can we do in order to potentially get them to get down to that 59 to 60 level? Would HVAC grading do it for them? Maybe. Would possibly a change to their duct configurations possibly get that? So the point is that there are things that can be close to budget neutral, if not entirely budget neutral, that could potentially find its way into scoring better in the HERS index with a savvy rater. So, you know, a savvy rater is going to go out there and work with their builders in order to find those opportunities for improvement. So I'm encouraging you all, if you're already doing performance code, you already probably have access to the HERS index tool. So you probably already know where a lot of your builders are. What can you do in order to get them to that next little step so they can start to participate in these programs? The incentives for HERS through the utilities vary depending on the utility. This is the consumer's rebate program. And so and it depends on whether the home is Energy Star or not. So if it is not Energy Star, we can see that, you know, the incentive is, you know, modest. You know, it kind of gives the builder a little bit of credit to help offset the participation by the rater in the process. Once you get up to down to a 55 or less, then you start to get into a decent amount of money, something that would probably put some money back in the builder's pocket in a lot of times. If they are Energy Star, you can get down to a HERS index of 40 or less, there's some really big incentives available, up to $4,000 per home. So definitely a little bit more to strive for if you're working with a builder that's perhaps pushing the envelope a little bit more and getting much better scores. It's worth noting that connected housing, townhomes, and duplexes are available for incentives as well, although with slightly more modest incentives for participation. For DTE, to get in the game, you have to have a 60 on the HERS index, and the incentive for participation is perhaps a little bit more generous out of the gate. There's a little bit more skin in the game for just doing a straight up HERS index and getting a 60. Now, the way that the incentive program works through DTE is a little bit different. So that would be your maximum incentive that we're looking at here. So 1,500 if it's an electric home, 2,100 if it's combo, 1,300 if it's gas only. And it kind of depends on the savings that come out of the energy modeling program, as well as potentially some of the prescriptive bonus incentives that come through DTE. This isn't meant to be an exhaustive program on the incentives through the utilities. So I would say go and talk to your new homes rep through both DTE and consumers if you have more questions about how these incentives work. But it's just meant to show there is some real sort of value proposition for a builder if they are starting to participate, especially when they're getting into these lower HERS index score categories, as well as potentially getting into an Energy Star certified home. Again, this is through DTE. It's a pay per performance program. I'm not going to go into exquisite details here. Talk to your new construction rep to be able to understand how to unpack this. And if you're using Ecotrope, it will calculate the incentive for you directly. So it's pretty transparent to both the builder as well as to the rater as to what compliance is looking like and what the incentive would be. So let's jump into Energy Star. Given that both DTE and consumers have programs that are help to incentivize Energy Star, let's talk about it. So the EPA's Energy Star Homes program has been around since 1995. And we are currently in the version 3.1 standard of the program. And the idea is to basically, recognize builders that are building homes that are 10 to 20% more efficient than a standard new home in their area. Version 3.1 builds off of codes that are a little bit more advanced than the 2009 IUCC. So the legacy version 3.0 standard, that was basically meant to say you're at least 10% better than the 2009. Well, now basically Michigan's on an amended version of the 2015, so we want to be 10 to 20% better than that. So that's why we're on version 3.1 of Energy Star now. The idea behind it is, both to have a home that scores well on the ERI, so having a good index score, but also having some mandatory criteria met. So things like properly installed insulation that achieves a ResNet Rater verified grade 1 installation quality, having air barriers and air sealing details that are attended to so that we have overall airtight homes. Having properly designed and installed HVAC systems, so both heating, cooling, and ventilation systems are all documented as functioning properly so as to ensure that consumers are comfortable in their homes as well as have low energy bills. And then there's a heavy focus, again, on ventilation, making sure that ventilation systems are designed and installed per the ASHRAE 62.2 program. So both whole house mechanical ventilation as well as local mechanical exhaust programs have to meet the requirements of ASHRAE 62.2. So in a lot of ways, this isn't a huge departure from the Energy Code itself. The Energy Code itself has a lot of provisions for properly installed insulation. Insulation is supposed to be installed per code, per manufacturer's standards, which more or less is the same as what a grade 1 is. The building enclosure is supposed to be air sealed and there's supposed to be air barriers in place. So Energy Star just kind of says the rater has to verify these things that likely are already supposed to be being done anyways. Duct leakage, again, Energy Star goes a little bit above and beyond what code might require because there's a total duct leakage test that has to be done for any duct system, whether or not the ducts are all in conditioned space or not. So that goes a bit above and beyond what a standard code home might be, but it does derive some value in terms of making sure that the airflow from the heating and cooling system is really, going efficiently throughout the house where we expect it to go. And then again, ventilation, the energy code already requires that ventilation systems meet the provisions of the International Residential Code or the International Mechanical Code. This is kind of just documenting that, in fact, they have. Energy Star has both a single family homes program as well as a multifamily new construction program. Generally speaking, when we're talking about the program that is going to apply for incentives through DTE and Consumers, we're really focused on that single family program, which is single family detached homes and then single family attached, such as duplexes and certain forms of townhomes. If we get into more complex townhome configurations where you have dwelling units above and below each other or potentially backing up to one another, those may not comply with the single family program. You may have to put them through multifamily new construction. And then apartment buildings also have to go through the multifamily new construction program. There is a next gen program through Energy Star, which is kind of like what it sounds like. It's sort of like Energy Star of the future. What it really focuses on is a really good building enclosure, insulation level, as well as all electric appliances. So a heat pump water heater, a heat pump for space conditioning, having electric cooking, as well as at least the hookups for EV charging. So this is a newer program that was launched a couple of years ago. And so it's just yet another way to participate. Again, here's that same eligibility table. And you can see that if you get into meeting Energy Star through consumers, that's really where the higher levels of incentives really start to kick in. So pushing your builders to meet Energy Star will help to pay them back. Same thing for, this is a consumers pilot program. The next gen program is able to basically get $5,000 through the utility, and then it's possibly eligible for the federal tax credit as well, depending on whether or not the builder is eligible for that tax credit or not. Speaking of the tax credit, the 45L, and again, you may have heard some rumblings about the future of the tax credit. Well, right now, the tax credit exists, and we're going to focus on that. We know that there is right now a $2,500 tax credit for meeting Energy Star through the 45L. Now, for homes this year, they have to actually be on a more advanced version of Energy Star beyond what's required by the utilities. You have to be hitting version 3.2 or version 3.3 to get that tax credit for any homes that basically are acquired this year. So how does this all shake out? Well, so for Energy Star version 3.1, the HERS index range might be between, say, like a 55 and a 65. For version 3.2 or 3.3 for the tax credit and for next gen, we're probably looking at scores that are between a 45 and a 55. So this is just ballparking, but this kind of gives you an idea of what you might want to kind of promote to your builders if they want to get these higher incentive levels. Through DTE, same deal. There are not incentives for next gen, but you can get incentives for standard Energy Star version 3.1. And again, if you have lower HERS index scores, so 45 or lower, with a heat pump, then you're really able to maximize that incentive level. Zero energy ready homes. So again, this is kind of the companion program through the Department of Energy Star, through the Department of Energy. It builds on the EPA Energy Star program, as well as incorporates EPA's Indoor Air Plus program, which is basically an air quality standard that is for residential buildings that has been promoted by the EPA since 2009. So to be a zero energy ready home, you have to be Energy Star, as well as you have to have Indoor Air Plus. Some of the other things that make zero energy ready homes special, you have to have a better building envelope. You have to have a building envelope that meets the 2021 IECC levels of insulation. So it's a better building enclosure. Windows have to be better than code minimum windows. The water heating system either has to be an efficient water heater or a more efficient water heating distribution design. Heating and cooling systems. The duct distribution system has to be 100% in conditioned space, or at least documented as meeting a buried ducts provision, as well as being tested to be very duct tight, basically. 100% efficient lighting throughout, Energy Star appliances throughout, as well as EV and PV readiness for the home. Again, also meeting that EPA Indoor Air Plus criteria, which includes things like ensuring that you have a more moisture tight foundation, ensuring that you are building in radon resilience. If you're in an EPA radon zone 1, which some of Michigan is, if you're in the Ann Arbor area, kind of Ann Arbor, Jackson, that kind of area, radon is a big deal. Those are EPA radon 1, zone 1 areas. And so building out radon is part of it. And that's something you can do through EPA's Indoor Air Plus. EPA Indoor Air Plus also has criteria for low emissions building products. So basically lower VOC building materials. And that's important because people live in homes and we don't want to be subject to materials that are off-gassing, things that are maybe not good for our health. So how does this really shake out? Well, basically right now, the Zero Energy Ready Homes program is in version 2, and the HERS scores are somewhere in the 40s. So it's kind of like the same level that you would want in order to participate in the $45 tax credit. Similar to Energy Star, there is a program specific to multifamily as well as one specific to single family. Again, through DTE and Consumers, we're really kind of focused on the single family, attached, detached, duplexes and some townhomes. Through this pilot program with consumers that runs this year, the home can be eligible for $10,000 in incentives through the utility, as well as possibly a $5,000 tax credit through the 45L. So, man, that's $15,000. Could your builder find a way to get there? I think that they could. For $15,000, that's worth thinking about. So if you are a rater working in consumers territory, how can you make that sale? How can you get your builders to consider following the Zero Energy Ready Homes program in order to get there? And it's important to note that they, have flexibility. It doesn't necessarily mandate that you have to have a all electric home. Zero Energy Ready Homes is not all electric mandatory. You can do a gas home and still meet the Zero Energy Ready Home specification. So again, you have to have a HERS score somewhere there in the 40s. I think if you really work with them, you can probably get there. So start looking at that. Kick the tires, because $15,000, when you add on the tax credit plus the utility incentive, that's some serious money. Again, here's that tax credit, the 45L, $5,000. Now, again, your builder will have to consult with their CPA as to whether they're eligible for that credit or not. But if they are, that's some good opportunity. Last but not least, Passive House, both FIAS and PHI. Again, there's two different standards that may be used here in the United States. I would say FIAS tends to have more brand recognition. Why? Well, they're based in Chicago, and they build upon these federal programs that we're more used to. They require a HERS index. They require that the home is Energy Star. They require that it meets the Zero Energy Ready Homes program. So whereas PHI does not require those other standards be met, FIAS has been a little bit more integrative with that federal national building performance programs apparatus that we have. What makes a home passive house? Well, we're going to talk a lot about that in future versions of these webinar series. But the big thing about passive house is it's a better building envelope, a substantially better one, more insulation, more thoughtful application of insulation, cutting down on things like thermal bridging, having extremely airtight homes. Think about 1 ACH 50 or less. That's where we're heading. windows that are very good windows, balanced heat recovery and moisture recovery ventilation, and then really just minimizing space heating altogether. It's essentially like we're trying to eliminate space heating almost entirely, just using, you know, internal gains from people living in the house as well as solar gain in order to really get us there. So FIAS builds off of all these federal standards. So you have to be Energy Star, Zero Energy Ready Homes in order to hit FIAS. They also have a zero program. Generally speaking, HERS NSC scores are going to be in the high 30s to low 40s. And through the consumers program, there is a incentive through this pilot running still this year. You would get $20,000 through consumers for being either PHI or FIAS certified, plus potentially the federal tax credit. So that's a lot to consider. That's the end of the presentation for today. Again, if you feel like you didn't get enough details about what makes Energy Star special or what makes Zero Energy Ready Homes special or Passive House, well, guess what? We're going to have multiple presentations dedicated just to those programs so you can really get to know those programs better. The next version of this webinar series is going to be on building envelopes. We will be back here in one more week, and I'm happy to have any questions that you may have here now. Patrick McCaffrey posted that just a note about the pilot, the Consumers Energy all-electric pilot ends at the end of this year, and it's a hard stop. So if you're going to participate in that more advanced program, you got to get the homes in this year. So unfortunately, whereas usually the utilities are very flexible about, getting pre-qualified, cannot necessarily do that this time around with these more generous incentives for Zero Energy Ready Homes, Next Gen, and Passive House. You have to get them in this year. Okay, well, got a couple more minutes here in case anybody has any questions. Happy to take any questions from any of the attendees. And we'll just hang out here since we only got a couple more minutes, just in case somebody else has some additional questions. More than happy to answer any of your questions that you may have. Otherwise, we are going to look forward to being back here in another week and continuing on here with this webinar series based off of above code programs to really kind of arm you with what you might be able to take home to your builders about the next step of the evolution in their building and how they can get rewarded through the utilities through an incentive for taking that next step. So we're going to go ahead and I think not seeing any additional questions come in, I think we're just going to go ahead and probably make this one a wrap. You're free to hang out here for a couple of minutes. Well, we got one more that came in here. Great presentation. Thanks so much. Thank you, Patrick. Definitely always excited to work with DTE and Consumers as well as the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. We've been a good partner in putting these presentations together, and I'm looking forward to the subsequent next ones. Thank you, Nick. Thanks for coming and hanging out with us for a minute.